Hello, everyone. Today's webinar is about messaging in regulated markets. It's about building for compliance from day one. I'm Piotr Nosek. I work for Erlang Solutions. My office is located in Kraków, in Poland. I'm software architect, been with the company for almost 15 years already, building messaging solutions most of this time. And I would like to share with you what I've learned about this subject on the way from my previous projects. First of all, I would like to talk why it's important to care about the regulations and compliance from the day one or day zero, even when creating a new product, developing software, deploying applications. Well, first of all, it's really too easy to forget that it's an important thing, and it's really easy to postpone it until the later stages of the project. If you don't think about the compliance and implement it into your product from the very beginning, what you'll need to do at some point, most likely, is do some reworks, refactoring, maybe the change of requirements, adding new components to the software. And we all feel what it means roughly. So it requires time and money. So it's overall expensive. And also, it could also be the case that the architecture that you planned and the architecture that you've implemented suddenly turns out to be very difficult to change and made compliant with all the regulations that you need to take into account when delivering your application to certain markets. So it might potentially even restrict your further development and expansion to different countries or areas of the world. Last but not least, negligence of following compliance and regulations can also have something more serious than just financial impact. It may also mean lawsuits. It may mean reputation loss, delays of delivery, and loss of trust, and so on. So you can imagine that if it's not tackled early enough, then it might become a serious problem late in the development of the project. The regulations and standards I would like to mention today are the first one, well, the closest ones to me because I'm located in European Union, is GDPR. It stands for General Data Protection Regulation. It's in effect since 2018 and overall applies to the area of privacy and personal data handling. The second one, also important to me because I work on healthcare related products for customers in America, is HIPAA. It's Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It's kind of older than GDPR, but touches very similar subjects and has very similar concepts actually. And the third one is FIPS 140. I've put the generic name here, but actually we have already the third edition of this standard, so it's more accurately FIPS 140-3. It's a collection of recommendations and standards about the implementation of cryptographic modules and software and hardware related components. Let's begin with GDPR. Overall, it applies whenever the data controller or processor is located in EU, or also usually applies if the users are the EU citizens. There are some exceptions, but well, we'll not dive into that many details. All these regulations and law acts are complex and long, definitely too long to discuss in detail in a short webinar. Overall, there are mostly about something called PII, personally identifiable information. As a rule of thumb, you can consider any piece of data that can be attributed to some specific individual, a PII. That would be probably the simplest possible definition. And what can we say about various aspects of data handling, of handling of these PIIs? Well, first of all, there's a keyword consent. Your users must be aware how you are collecting data, what data are you collecting, how it's processed. Well, at least on a high level. You don't need to describe all the technical details of the processing, but they must know what you know about them, what you collect about them, and they must give you an explicit permission to collect this data. That's why if you are located in the European Union and you browse various websites, you see all these cookie pop-ups, because with cookies, you are already collecting data. So the next one will be security. So we need to make sure that the data you gather is secure and will not be leaked. It is protected by a proper level of cryptography and well, overall encryption and all the processes that make them safe and sound. The next one is access. So overall, according to GDPR, your users have insight into the data that you've collected about them that can be attributed to them. So, for example, if you go to some popular messenger application and you can drill down into the menus, and you can find the option to download all the chats that you've exchanged so far, all the images you've shared, and so on. Meta information about the timestamps of the conversations, and so on and so forth. So we can request all this data. It is not delivered immediately usually. There is some delay, but well, GDPR doesn't specify what is the deadline for delivering this data if user requests it, but there is something like without unnecessary delay. So that's the key point here. Last but not least is the right to be forgotten. So it means that if a user decides that they don't want you to maintain their data anymore, they can request this data to be deleted. It's not that simple, because not all kinds of data can be deleted. For example, if you're a financial institution, even if a user requests, executes their right to be forgotten, you simply cannot remove everything, and probably you don't want to, because you need to keep some financial statements, transfer data, operation data for a certain period of time that's regulated by the country law, for example. So obviously consultation with a lawyer is necessary in this case, but overall, lots of items, lots of data pieces of data can be removed automatically in this case. To give you an example that this regulation is actually enforced, and it's important to follow it when you're dealing with EU citizens as your users, are the cases where large companies and popular companies were fined with significant amount of money because they didn't follow all the rules. The QR code that you can see on the slide leads you to an article that describes various cases of large lawsuits against these companies. But just as an example, the top one is 1.2 billion euros fine to Meta for transferring data from EU to US data center without sufficient protection, or with improper procedures. So obviously, not every data breach, leak, or improper handling will be fined with such a large sum of money, but you can imagine that you can easily bring down, uh, make bankrupt many companies, smaller ones. Meta is obviously very big, so won't kill them, uh, but let's say that I recommend reading this article because mm, it's always good to learn from mistakes, but it's even better to learn from mistakes of others. So let's learn from mistakes of the big ones so we don't repeat them. I would also like to mention regarding all this stuff about data breaches and so on, that it doesn't also apply to users in case of the GDPR, but for example, it also applies to employee information. So if you're a company in EU and you have employees, you also must protect their data with the same rules. Okay, let's talk about HIPAA then. So it also uses the concept of PII, but it also adds the concept of PHI. It stands for Protected Health Information. So all kinds of medical data that can be attributed to a specific person. So like I've said already, it has very similar concept to GDPR. One of them is consent. So this data is consensually collected by the data administrators, maintainers. Everyone has insight into the medical data that has been collected about them. They also have right to correct this data. So, for example, if they see that some critical information is missing in their medical record, they have the right to request amendment in their record. And also, HIPAA standard introduces the concept of covered entities and business associates. So the former being the companies that actually deliver the health services, and the latter one being the companies that, let's say, help them with that. So this could be, for example, companies that process data but don't perform any actual healthcare services. There's a very good chance that if you're working on a project that must comply with HIPAA, you'll most likely be the business associate, but still you'll need to follow all the rules and maintain very high standard, high quality of data processing and security. I mentioned about FIPS 140. So it was released by US government, and this one is probably the easiest one to follow because it has been implemented by various popular libraries like OpenSSL, which is used by really many pieces of software, including MongoDB, for example. And it describes which algorithms and techniques are approved. This describes the distinct levels of security that require different measures. Overall, another document that would require more time to discuss, but what I would like to emphasize here is that it's easy to make your product FIPS compliant. Just use one of the official cryptographic libraries, enable the FIPS mode there, and it already will make your life easier. You'll know that your product uses only the strongest algorithms, methods, and so on. And you can easily say to any customer that your product is FIPS compliant. That, well, at least that's the very beginning. There might be other aspects, but it's a very good start. Okay, I already mentioned about Mongoose IM, so I would like it to be our first case study here today. So all the measures we took while developing, extending, implementing Mongoose IM led us to this piece of software being GDPR and HIPAA compliant, and also it has aforementioned FIPS 140 mode. What's more about the security? It supports end-to-end encryption. Well, lets the client enable this encryption, so it facilitates the negotiation between them. It supports encryption for all kinds of connections that are incoming and outgoing from it. It has modular design and has a proven track record in healthcare and other high-trust industries. I would like to elaborate a bit about some aspects that I've mentioned in the previous slide. So the first one is modularity. So it essentially covers the two things from the standards that I've described. Um, if you enable only the features that actually your application really needs, so you don't keep any unneeded extensions, you minimize the data that you gather. And this is also expected both by GDPR and HIPAA, that you don't collect data that you don't need. So if you keep your Mangozyme configured, that's in a configuration that's tailored for your needs, then you make sure that you fulfill the requirement of data minimization. And also, well, you can guess that less enabled extensions obviously is better performance usually because, well, less processing has to be done. From the developer perspective and maintainer perspective, it also means that Mangozyme is easy to extend and customize either by your in-house team, or you can also hire experts like Erlang Solutions to help you with that. It's not a problem to develop anything that's custom for an application that could be needed. Security. So already I mentioned that Mangozyme has FIPS 140 mode. Also, again, it can facilitate the establishment of end-to-end encryption sessions, because obviously end-to-end encryption wouldn't be end-to-end encryption if any kind of cryptographic operations happened on the server actually. So server in this case is just a place to exchange the secrets, like the parts of the secrets in PubSub nodes and so on. Well, technical details, but overall, Mangozyme has its all that's needed for modern clients to establish these sessions. Incoming and outgoing connections use TLS, of course, so it's both for the client connections, but also for the outgoing connections to database, to other services that could be integrated with Mangozyme. Under the bullet point secure authentication, we have two things. One of them would be the secure storage for the password. So the days where passwords could be stored in plaintext are long gone, fortunately, in most services. But I'm afraid that probably somewhere out there in the internet, there are still applications that use this method, but it's a very bad idea. I'm sure you all know. So in Mangozyme, it's a standard thing to use Scrum uh, algorithm to secure the passwords. And the second aspect is authentication by public key. So it's also a feature you can generate public keys for your clients, and they can use them to authenticate without password. I think about ownership. So again, it depends where your application is located and what kind of data, what are the owners of your data, who are your users, where they are located. All of it defines what kind of regulations you might need to follow, but you can influence that by the fact that Mangozyme is an open source product and can be deployed anywhere. So it's your choice whether you deploy it on premise in some specific country with specific regulations. You can be always sure where the data is. For example, you can ensure that European Union data stays in European Union because you decide where it's actually deployed and you have control over that. But also you can decide to deploy it in cloud if you have different ideas, different goals, and so on. Again, due to being open source, you are free to develop custom stuff there, improve it as you wish. But you can also hire consultants that can provide support and development for your Mangozyme installation. There's another aspect. I already mentioned the data retrieval that it can be done, for example, for the messaging applications, that you can usually with one click request data about your conversations that you've conducted in the past. So I remember that when GDPR was announced and was actually implemented, we had quite a long discussion in Manguseum team. What actually is the data that should be affected by the retrieval, and something that I will discuss later, the removal. It's not easy because GDPR provides some indications what this data is. That, well, it's this PII, that data that can be tied to a specific individual, but there isn't like bullet point list of all the items that need to be retrieved or removed. You won't find in GDPR a list that says, for example, that you need to return data like the last login time, or you need to exactly return conversation or anything else. It's both a blessing and a curse, I'd say, because, well, you are open to interpret this law and think how it applies to your software. Uh, it makes things somewhat easier because you know your product the best and you can identify the areas, the types of data that can be tied to a specific user and which are not. But on the other hand, well, you need to do something. You need to do some planning and design and really consider what should you include in this process. So in Manguseim, there's a dedicated endpoint to do that. And an example of data that's retrieved when you trigger this process is the message archive of a user, vcard of a user. So it's, let's say it's a profile. So the users can put the names, phone numbers, and address and so on there. And roster, so a contact list. But there obviously there's more data. These are just examples that you can use inspiration for your own process. And the right to be forgotten, so forgetting a user. Like I said, not everything can or should be removed. There are some verticals like fintech where you probably should keep lots of data. I remember discussing it with one of my colleagues at some point that, well, he worked with a fintech company and he said that they are lucky because in fintech, they actually still need to keep most of the data in their databases because of other regulations that require them to store financial data for a certain period of time. In messaging, actually, we can remove much more. The scope is very similar to retrieving the data, probably somewhat bigger. But the key point here is the anonymization. It's way easier to forget a user if you use some randomized, anonymized ID for a user for most data connections, the relations. For example, if you were to use phone number, it's risky. If you use phone number as an ID for a user everywhere in the database, then you'll have to, in case the user requests, exercise their right to be forgotten, you'll probably have to iterate over all of these entries where this phone number is used and transform them to something else. The registration of the user, if you ensure that the ID is randomized, for example, it can be UID or some random integer, whatever you choose, even if you leave it somewhere in the database after forgetting a user, you can clearly say that it cannot be really attributed to a specific person. Also, it makes the logging safer because you won't have to look through the logs and try to remove all the entries that apply to this user. Also in Manguseim, there's a dedicated endpoint to just remove a user with one operation. That's it for now when it comes to Manguseim. I would also discuss briefly another case study that is about our customers, American healthcare companies. So obviously HIPAA compliance and what measures they took and what they had to take into account when developing their products and where we helped them. So important thing is logs reduction. I already mentioned that anonymization is important and helpful in case of logs, but actually it can and should go even further. So you can take one of the two approaches here. The first one is to implement some kind of automatic removal of sensitive data in logs, but you have to decide how to detect it. For example, you need to look for a specific keywords in the log lines, or maybe you can redact these logs later by some regular expression, or earlier by applying some transformation. Well, all of these are technical details. It's up to you how you approach this. But there is another way to accomplish the similar goal. Just assume the strict control over what's logged. So you can have all kinds of logs for your application as a debug mode, for example, and log everywhere there. But for production, it's an option to have a special kind of logs that are logged only in production. So they are not like defined level, warning, debug, info, and so on. There are these special logs meant just for production, and it's strictly controlled, documented, uh, and reviewed what ends up in these logs. For example, what's safe to log? It's safe to log what kind of event has happened, what user IDs were involved. Again, anonymization. If you used, for example, names for user IDs, then it's risky. Definitely, you should use just some UIDs or integers and so on. Already mentioned, don't log names, but also remember, don't log message content. Well, all kinds of data may end up there. If you implement a healthcare application that involves messaging, it's it's bound to have some medical information exchange in these messages. So just please don't log them. Otherwise, it will be really risky in case of any audits or issues. Audit trail. So it's important to keep it. It's important to record who did what and when it happened. It may serve different purposes. For example, there was a message exchange between doctors, notification about some condition for some patient, and it could be a subject of a lawsuit whether this doctor attended this patient or not, and it could be important to see in the logs, in the audit trail, that this specific doctor actually received this message and they opened this message. So it could be it could serve as a proof that they consciously neglected the information, or it could actually prove that they did not read it because they couldn't for some reason, and it also prove that they're innocent, for example. Another case could be something from the past they remember that in completely different application there was a police investigation. They also needed information about who contacted whom in a specific time period for a specific user, because there was some criminal investigation and they just needed this data to learn the timeline of some events. And we were asked to provide it, and it was also a form of audit trail. So you can either do it in logs or have dedicated tables in database. It's your choice, whatever most convenient for you. Tables in database are probably more structured, while logs are easier to implement and faster. And the examples of such events could be user logging in, logging out, messenger being sent, received, uploading of a specific attachment. There also could be other actions like creating a group chat and so on. So usually the more the better, as long as you obviously don't overload your system with excessive logs. Okay, another topic is that you should not disclose more information than it's really needed. So, for example, if you have an application and it uses push notifications, obviously it will. All applications use push notifications nowadays. Then it's a very good idea to encrypt the content, because this case you can say that the content of these notifications, it's highly unlikely that someone sits at Apple or Google and reads all the push notifications, or I really doubt that they analyze the push notifications and try to do some intelligence research on them. But still, it's a good idea to just encrypt this information and don't worry about it. Also encrypt the message archive, especially when you're working in the cloud. So database is deployed somewhere, right? Usually it's some provider, and it's also a good idea to store only encrypted data there. Especially that if well, I hope it won't happen, but if there is a security breach, it's easier to extract sensitive data from unencrypted data. Also, another measure is restricting access to production servers. It's kind of a product choice, maybe a security choice, organizational choice, to let various people like developers or maybe testers into the production servers. Probably not a good idea, but it's up to you. It can speed up things like debugging problems, but the less people have direct access to production servers, the better. Simple as that. You can also ensure security and control over data with something that I already mentioned is on-premise deployment. So if you deploy on-premise, like in the hospital, then you can be sure that really just minimal number of people have access to the installation, and no unnecessary information is not disclosed. Okay, so we're near the end. So here are key takeaways that I would like you to remember to inspire you from listening to this webinar. So again, something that I've told you at the very beginning is the compliance from day zero. So don't postpone the decisions that lead to compliance. Don't think about it in the late stage of project. Think about it at the very beginning. There might be some investment of time and money into making your products compliant, but at the same time you gain an architecture that don't have to be reworked in the future, and it will simply pay off in the later stages of development. Encrypt everything. So it applies encryption of connections, of data in database, push notifications, like I've mentioned. So apply encryption, strong encryption, preferably that is compliant with FIPS standard, anywhere you can. Audit, remember about audit trail, because it might be necessary sometimes. Usually it's necessary when something unpleasant happens, but you don't want to have an application that doesn't offer it. It also in certain areas might be required by regulations. Data location, think about it, where the data will be located, whether it's cloud or on-premise, in EU, in US. Many countries, European Union as a whole has certain laws about this and transfer of the data and how it's processed. So all of it has to be considered when deploying the software. Accident removal, make sure that data that your users produce and they are owners of can be accessed, so they can retrieve their own data, and this data, whenever it's allowed, can be also removed. Anonymize whenever you can. So don't use phone numbers or names or anything specific for your identifiers on in the database. Use just some random strings, UIDs, whatever. It will make your life easier, especially in case of the removal. For example, you won't have to worry that this random UID is left somewhere in the database, because without other pieces of data, like for example the user profile, it will be rather impossible to figure out who this person was with ID something. Modular design, well, it's even if you're building a custom solution, not talking about Mongodb here right now, for example, but talking about the custom solution, try to keep your software modular, because, well, you can turn off problematic components, and it's easier to control where the data ends and in what shape. If you have just one big monolith, It's easier to just leak personal data here and there in various areas of the software in the database. It's simply more difficult to control. Data minimization. So again, only gather as much data as you actually need to deliver the service. Don't try to collect more than you need because, well, if it's noticed and someone discovers that you, for example, well, you can actually call it spying on users. If someone figures it out, you can face very serious consequences. Last but not least are trainings. So I'm talking about the trainings that you deliver to your employees, because your employees will be the ones that implement the software, that operate it, that maintain it, perform tests, deploy it, and so on and so forth. And it means that they need to understand what kind of regulations they need to consider. They don't have to be experts on these laws. They don't need to learn every detail of these regulations. But it's important for them to understand the basic principles of the standards that apply in the areas where the software will be deployed or used. So it's, as an employer, it's your responsibility to make your employees aware and well informed how to deal with these regulations. And that would be all. Thank you for listening.